You want to go ahead and open it up. We're going to be in the Gospel of Luke this morning. I'm starting a new series, but I'm calling it like a sort of a new series. It's not really a new series because it is a continuation of where we've been over the past few weeks. We've been in Micah chapter 6, verse 8. We've really dealt with that. We were looking at justice and mercy and humility, and we're going to keep looking at those three ideas, justice and mercy and humility, but we're going to transition into the New Testament. As we leave Micah, I don't want you to think that justice and mercy and humility are just, kind of Old Testament values that God let go of once we get into the New Testament. As a matter of fact, we're going to be looking specifically over the next few weeks at a few parables of Jesus and how they tie into justice or mercy or humility or maybe all three. Today I'm going to read a parable that is going to address something that I think, if you've been here with us, has been maybe on a lot of our hearts and our minds as we've waded through some of the difficulty, the challenge of Micah chapter 6, verse 8. Remember that we were we were looking at showing mercy to people who do not deserve it. Right? This is one of the elements that we talked about a couple of weeks ago because we are trusting God. Remember last week we were humbling ourselves under his mighty hand. We are showing mercy to people who don't deserve it because we are trusting that God will take care of the justice piece. Right? So if there's some sort of injustice that's occurring, we're trusting God, we're humbling ourselves under his mighty hand. We're saying, you are God, we are not. And so we humble ourselves under his mighty hand. And so we wait. We wait for God to take care of the justice, which sounds really cool, sounds really awesome. But when you actually have to do that, I've just talked to some of you and you're going through a season, you're going through some sort of a phase right now in your life where you are trying to live in mercy with people who really don't deserve it. And you're looking to God to do justice. And if you could hear some of these stories, you would know why my heart just breaks to hear some of the things that you're going through. These are tough situations. It seems like waiting for justice is this theme, and it starts in the Old Testament and it goes all the way through. Matter of fact, in Revelation chapter 6, verse 10, at the end, we're still waiting. They cried in a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? There's this moment that we're in. It's kind of in the meantime. And somebody once said, when you're waiting for justice, it is a very mean time. It is a very mean time. I called today's sermon, In the Meantime. We're going to look at a parable of the persistent widow in Luke chapter 1 or 18, verse 1. It's also known as the unjust judge. It's not very popular to teach on this parable because you'll see why. It's kind of hard to teach on. You'll see why in just a second. But as we're, if you're not there, you can go ahead and turn there. But as we're kind of getting ready for this, just a couple of quick sort of logistical notes. First of all, I don't know if you know this, but about 35% of Jesus' teaching he taught in parables. He wasn't really an expository preacher as far as we can see. Most of what the recorded preaching that we have was topical, or sorry to burst some people's bubbles, sorry. But another interesting thing, and I didn't learn this until just a couple of years ago when I was teaching through some other parables, that the synoptic Gospels are the only Gospels that include any of Jesus' parables. I don't know if you knew that. The Gospel of John doesn't have any parables in it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just a little quick a glimpse into what this word synoptic means. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but if you haven't, syn, S-Y-N, means together, and optic is to view, optical. And so the three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are referred to as the synoptic Gospels, and then the one outlier is John. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they see things from a very similar place. It is they see together with this common view. So when you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you'll hear a lot of the same stories. We know that all the parables are included only in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There are a lot of the same things, and John then is an outlier. So just in case you didn't know what the synoptic Gospels were, there you go. That was free. You're not even going to have to pay for that one. So, we are picking up in Luke chapter 18, verse 1, and we are told right off the bat, check it out. Look at your Bibles, and we'll see exactly what is happening there. Jesus told them a parable to the effect, here's why he's telling it, to the effect that they ought always to pray and to not lose heart. So before we even start the story, we're told exactly what we should be thinking about right now. And I'm speaking especially to those of you who have been praying about something. Maybe you've been praying about that you're waiting for justice to be served. You're showing mercy. You're doing the things that God has asked you to do, and you're waiting for that justice. You've been praying about those things. I'm asking everybody in the room to start thinking about the things that you have been praying for, maybe for a long time. You've been praying for something for a long time, and there's this unfulfilled desire. You're waiting for justice. You're longing for something that is still empty inside of you. This is a message for those of you who are walking by faith. You are waiting for God to answer some prayer of yours, for some sort of response from God. Maybe it's a restoration, maybe redemption, maybe you're waiting for healing, but you have been sending up those prayers and you're still waiting for the answer, for him to set things right. Jesus told them a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and to not lose heart. Okay? Verse 2. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. So immediately, right off the bat, we know this is not a good dude. He's not a God figure. He's not a hero. He's nothing like that. Matter of fact, he sounds kind of like a jerk, honestly. He's not a good guy. Verse 3, and there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him, saying, give me justice against my adversary. This is that prayer that we've been talking about. For a while, he refused. But afterward, he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice so that she will not beat me down with her continual coming. So you can kind of hear the jerk coming out there. Whatever the reason for giving in, he eventually gives justice to this widow. Okay, verse 6. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says, and will not God give justice to his elect, who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? So in other words, Jesus says, if this judge who neither fears God nor respects man, he's not a good human being, if even he grants the request for justice from this widow, then how much more will God, will your Father in heaven grant your request? So back to the beginning where Jesus started. So the point is, pray and do not lose heart. This is what Jesus is trying to teach us. But I want to deal with sort of an underlying point, something that is sort of intrinsic with this idea of praying and not losing heart, and that is that there is a difficult reality that there will be seasons when you will be tempted to lose heart. Okay, so you will be sending up your prayers and you will be tempted because Jesus says, don't lose heart. In other words, there's going to be a temptation that is going to come on every single one of us to lose heart. There is a season in every single one of our lives when we are tempted to lose heart because our prayers have not been answered yet. Our prayers have not been answered. We are you know this as well as I do. We are a quick fix society. We like our solutions right away. Babe, come on, seems like the faster, the better. When we look to things, it's always about how fast we look at Amazon. Remember, it used to be 2-day shipping. Now it's like 5 days, and I'm so annoyed with that. What takes so long to get our things here? We're like, it's a long time that sometimes we have to wait, but God asks us to wait, and something inside of us just kind of recoils at that idea. Like, how many times am I going to have to ask for this? Like, how long, God, do I have to wait for this answer? Because we like things just fast. We like things quick. And so when God takes time, he tells us to linger and to persevere. We're like, wait a second. Something inside of us just gets frustrated about it. I've never read this book called Your God is Too Safe. I read this book with our staff at our last church. As a matter of fact, where is Pastor John? Is he here? He's in here somewhere. There he is right there. I was right in the middle. This, and Deborah, this is the worship pastor from Lake Almanor Community Church, who I used to serve with, his wife Deborah, and daughter-in-law Megan. This is, for those of you who didn't know this is Pastor Ben, worship pastor's father. So if you didn't know that, so now you can say hi to John and Deborah. Anyway, he was a part of this. We read this book. You remember reading this? Your God is Too Safe. I just want to read you a little section of this. I know a woman who has been waiting a long time for God. She's been praying, sometimes in numbness, sometimes in anger, sometimes in sorrow, sometimes in fainting hope. She was once vigorous, vivacious. She spent her weekdays teaching a classroom of small children, her weekends kayaking and mountaineering with her husband, making beautiful things with her hands, worshiping with a community of people. Now she can do none of that. Now she spends her days and most of her nights staring at a ceiling. Something has afflicted her, something the doctors haven't a clear name for, and now she lacks the energy even to stand. She's everlastingly tired, and yet she can't sleep. Something raging inside her, a sorrow and a terror, keeps her from it. She waits. Her husband waits. Her friends wait. They wait and they pray. The waiting is long, dreary, heavy. At times their faith is huge, robust, militant. They defy, they command, they harangue. Other times they pray falteringly. Even begging has gone out of them. They pray not in faith, but out of faithfulness, out of a loyalty to a God they haven't seen or heard from in a long, lonely time. When I think about her, I have only a single argument as to why she or anyone should keep praying. It is this: prayer and waiting are intrinsically linked. They are joined at the hip. Prayer makes no sense apart from waiting. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but part of prayer makes no sense without waiting. Part of prayer includes that we wait for the Lord. We've all been in a place when we are waiting on God. Matter of fact, some of you are there right now. I know you are. I don't care who you are. I have yet to meet a person who doesn't have some desire, something on their heart that God hasn't yet met. And this parable is going to ask us, at least by implication, to deal with the reality of unanswered prayers. Some people are going to try to give us an easy response, and they're going to say things that I think are very man-centric, man-focused. They're going to say things like, oh, he's not a powerful prayer. Maybe you just need to get a real powerful prayer in there. Oh, you should talk to so-and-so. They're a powerful prayer. Or they're going to say things like, oh, maybe you just don't have enough faith. In other words, sometimes our unanswered prayers are explained by people who want to put it all on us and say, oh, you're just not doing something right. You're not getting or achieving something that you should be achieving. Your prayers are not answered because you're not doing it good enough. But if you read the scriptures honestly, you have to see that sometimes there is more to it than that. Sometimes there is a lot more to it than that. All of us have felt the loneliness, maybe the disappointment of unanswered prayer. And the only thing sometimes that returns from heaven is silence. If you've never been there in your life, odds are, between now and the end, you will be in that place. You will be in that place when your prayers have gone unanswered. What is going on with that? Today, what I want to do is I want to have us ask 4 questions in the meantime. In this time when we are waiting. We just talked about Micah and justice and mercy and humility and trusting God. And sometimes that just doesn't always compute with the way that we go through this life. We send up our prayers to God and he says he's going to honor them with justice, but there is a season, there's a time when he doesn't. So I want to give us 4 questions that we're going to work through and see if we can maybe help come to some better answers. And I'm going to start with the most obvious one. It's number 1 on your outline. Have I asked God with persistence and with faith? Now, this is kind of the main point of the parable, and it seems like such an obvious question that we don't even really need to answer the question. We're like, well, this is all about prayer. Of course, I pray. I know that we pray, but we got to hold on and pause on this. We really got to think about this and not just blow past it today, because there is a difference between a wish and a prayer. You know that? And sometimes what happens in our lives is things come into our minds and we're like, oh man, I hope God takes care of that. Or I wish God would take care of that. A wish is some sort of a thought that something would get better. But a prayer is when you take the time to take that wish, to take that thought, and you turn it into a verbal request of God. And I know it seems weird, but I'm going to tell you right now that oftentimes we don't make that leap. We don't make that leap. Things stay in the wish thought category, and they don't actually make it to prayer. Sometimes the desires of our heart never actually make it to prayer. Before we talk about anything else, we need to ask the question, do you really pray? Do you really pray? I heard someone once say, they said the big secret of the church is not pornography or is not pride or anything like that. The big secret of the church is that people don't actually pray. Oh, we say we pray. We talk a lot about prayer, but when it comes right down to it, at the end of the day, have we really? So let's just start there. It seems like an obvious one, but we just need to start there. Do you pray? Jesus says, pray. And then he says, and do not lose heart. Pray and do not lose heart. In other words, built into our prayer is an element of persistence. Pray and do not lose heart. So have I asked God, not just asked him once, but have I asked him with persistence, where I keep coming before him? It's kind of the point of the parable. There was a widow in a city who kept coming to him saying, give me justice against my adversary. When we pray, we need to make sure that we don't disconnect the ask from the keep asking. We need to make sure we don't disconnect the pray from the keep praying. Usually my prayers are not, honestly, they're just not characterized by persistence. I go to God for that quick fix, and if God hasn't answered my prayer, if I prayed about something for like a week straight, I feel like I'm doing pretty good. I'm like, man, I've been praying for a long time about this thing, and if God hasn't solved the problem, I kind of pack things up. But God has wired it in a way so that prayer often requires endurance. Mark Buchanan says prayer makes no sense apart from waiting. Endurance is usually a part of our prayer. Sometimes if I ask for something one time and it doesn't happen, I pack up my prayer bags and I go find another solution to the problem. Have we asked God with persistence and with faith? If we haven't included the element of endurance in our prayers, we might be missing the point. And here's why. The point of prayer is not just getting what you want, okay? Hopefully you've heard someone sometime in your spiritual journey say that to you. The point of prayer is not just getting what you want. Sometimes the prayer is to build our faith. The parable tells us that God is going to bring justice speedily. You're like, oh, that sounds good. We're also told in 2 Peter chapter 3 not to overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as 1 day. The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promises, some count slowness, but is patient toward you. He is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. In other words, as you wait for your prayer to be answered, God is working on something in you. God is working on, don't miss that. Don't miss that. As you wait for your prayer to be answered, God is working on something in you. Have you ever heard it said that I thank God for not giving me what I thought I wanted and giving me what I didn't know I needed? I thank God for not giving me what I thought I wanted and giving me what I didn't know I needed. Maybe some of you have heard, go to that next slide, a picture of just a rowboat sitting out in the water. Somebody said this to me one time and it always stuck with me. Yeah, he said, prayer is kind of like a rope. You're sitting out in a rowboat and your rope is tied to the shore, and on shore there's this huge, magnificent tree, and that tree is God. And so when you pray, what you do is you start pulling on the rope. You say, God, I need you to come over here. I want your will to become my will. And you start pulling on the rope in your prayer, and you're getting closer to God, but guess who's moving, right? You're getting closer to God, but guess who's moving? Sometimes prayer is about God growing us in a way that we can't even really imagine. We are building our faith. We are building our trust. We are coming into his will instead of pulling him into ours. Endurance in prayer builds our faith that we didn't even know that we needed. Faith that we didn't even know we needed. You know, faith is what God is after in you. Your faith is what God is after. What does it say in Hebrews 11:6? Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. As a matter of fact, at the end of this parable, when Jesus says all this stuff about praying, about insistence, remember the very last line, he says, nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? It doesn't require a lot of faith to ask for God, to ask for something one time and then move on. What it requires faith to do is to get up the next day and to ask the same thing you asked today. And then in a week from now, to ask for that same thing again in a month from now and in a year from now, actually trusting God that you are turning this over to him. Oftentimes we say, man, God never says yes to my prayers. If you're not getting a yes, maybe it's because you have quit too early. Maybe because you gave up. There was no element of persistence built into your prayers. Maybe your prayers are like my prayers, where I go to him quickly, and if it doesn't work out, I just move on. The parable's teaching us there is a persistence that is built into prayer. Listen, imagine how you would pray if you didn't get bored with prayer. Imagine how you would pray if you didn't get bored with prayer. I told you before stories about my twin sister. My twin, she went crazy. She went crazy for a while there. It was actually a really kind of a scary time for the whole family. My parents, by my calculations, prayed for my sister for 14 years before they saw any restoration. Have you ever prayed for something that long and not lost heart? Have you ever prayed for your kids for that long and not lost heart? There will be a period in all of our lives where our faith is being built and our prayer is going unanswered. Many of you know Elizabeth Kramer. Is Elizabeth here today? Her new last name is Hager, Elizabeth Hager. She just got married. Elizabeth and I sat down a while ago. Elizabeth's got quite a story, and I asked her if she would share a little bit of a testimony like we've been doing lately. And so she just told, this is just a little glimpse of her story. It's just a couple of minutes, but I wanted to show this to you. If you know Elizabeth, you know that she is a woman of incredible faith. And a lot of the faith that she has now was built during some of the hardest seasons of her life, when her prayers were going unanswered. Go ahead and watch this little video. You can play that.
So I grew up in church, went to church my entire life, basically. And my parents started having problems when, I think they probably had problems the whole time. And then when I was a teenager, things really started coming out, and I just became very rebellious and didn't really... I gave my heart to Jesus when I was 4, and I was just really on fire for God, but I don't think I really understood the relationship part of it. I'd just grown up with all these do's and don'ts, and so really didn't dig into the Bible for myself or anything like that. And so very rebellious as a teenager, got mixed up with the wrong crowd, and met this guy that was very charming and good looking, and I ended up getting pregnant, and we got married. And so, anyway, it was a very horrific relationship. It was very painful and really very difficult. And he ended up leaving when I was 7 months pregnant with our third baby. And I was only, I wasn't even 22 at the time. It was just before I turned 22. So I had these 3 little ones, all by myself. And so, and I had been told, just pray hard enough and do all these things so that God would fix my marriage. And then when he didn't, I was really angry with him, honestly. I felt like I had been betrayed. And so, I kind of walked away from him for a period of time, and he has been so kind to me, because every time I've struggled, he's drawn me back. And Anyway, just kind of struggled through that, dealt with some anger and bitterness and a lot of pain. And then there was kind of a whole lot of things that happened. And I felt really broken because like my dream of having, this nice Christian family and all these things, it just fell apart. So the thing I love the most about my story is God's redemption through it, because you can look at my life and it's quite obvious it hasn't been perfect and I haven't lived my life perfectly and everything hasn't gone smoothly, but God has been there through all of it, and he can take things that we think he can't redeem, or pain that we think we'll never get over, and he can turn our mourning into laughter. Like, I can look back at my life now and the pain and the things that I've walked through, and I can see God's goodness through the whole thing. And I think that's what's the coolest part of it, is that like my life can give other people hope, because if God can bring me through what he's brought me through, he can bring anybody through anything. So that's what I am excited about, because I can look back at my life and I can smile and I can see God's goodness through all of it, even the hard things, because I really do feel like God has put a calling on my life to help others walk through painful and difficult things too. So, and give other people hope.
Okay. So what are we doing here? Oh yeah. Remember what Jesus said? He told them a parable to the effect that they would pray and not lose heart. So pray and do not lose heart. God is, even if you can't feel it, even if you cannot see it, God is doing something. God is doing something. So the very first question we ask, have I actually asked God with persistence and with faith? But there is a pitfall in the waiting that we also have to be careful for. We really have to watch out for this. Sometimes it is not godly growth in faith that happens in our waiting. Sometimes the opposite is true. Number two, the second question we're going to ask, and these two will come a little more quickly, has this longing created something unhealthy in me? So in the book of James, chapter 4, verse 1, he says, what causes quarrels and fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you do not have, so you murder, you covet, you cannot obtain, so you fight and you quarrel, right? I don't know if you remember that passage from James. What do fighting and arguing and coveting and murder have to do with asking God? They all have this one thing in common, and that is an unfulfilled desire. The idea is that you have this dream, you have this idea of the way things should go, and this dream is either going to make you alive, it is going to make you full of joy and expectation and hope and faith, or if it's unmet, it can do the opposite, and it can cause you to turn on people. It can cause you to turn on people. Often when you're conflicted on the inside, you're in conflict on the outside. You ever seen that happen in yourself or in other people? If you're conflicted on the inside, you're in conflict on the outside. I heard once at a conference, somebody said, pain that is not transformed is transmitted. Pain that is not transformed is transmitted. Either we release that unfulfilled desire into the hands of God and we allow it to transform and to grow our faith, or that pain gets transmitted to someone else. We lash out at our kids, we lash out at our spouses, at our friends, at our family. God, it's not going the way that I wanted it to go. And so we start to sow seeds of division and slander and anger and hatred and gossip and cause pain, because things aren't going the way. Pain that is not transformed is transmitted. Pain that is not transformed pain that is not transformed is transmitted. So number two, has this longing created something unhealthy in me? We have to be careful of that. Number three, what then is your motive for praying? Another question that we have to ask ourselves. So if we ask God with faith and persistence, is it causing anything unhealthy in me? What is my motive for my prayer? The widow says, give me justice against my adversary. The implication there is that she's asking for something that's true, something that's noble. James says a little bit later, he says, you ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. He says you're asking with the wrong motive. That word wrongly is the Greek word kakos, and it really means sick or diseased. In other words, our requests are infected. And at this point, I think we all have to kind of acknowledge that God knows some of these things better than we do, because it's really hard to determine your own motives sometimes in prayer. Hard to really determine if they're pure, if they're true. Seems like that would be an easy thing for us to do. But sometimes we get a no because they're not actually true. And that requires God to speak into us and to say something that we can't always see for ourselves. Or sometimes what we think would be good for us will actually end up being bad for us. As if you've been told that sometimes your desires actually lead you away from God. That shouldn't be a huge surprise to us, but sometimes it is. Sometimes the things that we desire actually lead us away from God. Bob Goff wrote a book, Love Does, and he says, I've learned that God sometimes allows us to find ourselves in a place where we want something so bad that we can't see past it. Sometimes we can't even see God because of it. When we want something that bad, it's easy to mistake what we truly need for the thing that we really want. Sometimes God says no because we're asking for something that would lead us further away from Him. He is not going to give you a gift that is going to make you more obsessed with the gift than it is with the giver. He's not going to give you a gift that is going to benefit you, but is going to hurt other people. So how pure is your request? That's the third one for us to think about. Okay, so let's kind of bring this to the final idea here. See, sometimes we presented our requests to God with persistence and with faith. It is not creating anything evil inside of us. It is not creating anything unhealthy inside of us. And our motives really are pure. They really are true. But God still doesn't answer the prayer. That leads us to the last question then, number 4. How do we not waste the waiting or the no? If at this moment God has me waiting, or He is telling me no, what is He doing? There's a book that came out a while ago called Don't Waste Your Pain. Sometimes we lift our requests to God, and God says, wait, keep waiting. Or He says, no. I think every single believer in Jesus Christ needs to have a good theology of no. We need to know that God sometimes says no to our requests. Remember, Jesus did this with John the Baptist. John the Baptist said, Jesus, are you coming? And Jesus says, no. And we know what happened to John the Baptist. This is a moment for us to sit in this idea that is going to happen to every single one of us at some point in our lives. We're going to make a request of God, and God is going to say no. It will happen to every single one of us. How do I know that is going to happen to every single one of us? Because it happened to Jesus. You know, Jesus got a no from heaven. I don't know if you remember this. People don't think of it this way, but there was a moment when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's praying to God. You remember what he says? He says, Father, if it's your will, take this cup from me. And we know that at this point, Jesus is in absolute agony. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and it says his sweat became like great drops of blood that fell to the ground. He is in absolute agony because he knows what's coming. He knows what is about to happen. Judas is going to come with the mob. He knows about the arrest. He knows about the torture. He knows about the beating, the crucifixion. He knows about the pain. And he says, Father, not God, not great architect in the sky, not some distant name for God. He says, Father, Dad, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. This is Jesus' prayer to God the Father in heaven. And is there any other way? Is there anything else we can do? Is there any other way to do this? And God says no. There's no yes coming from heaven for Jesus, right? Every one of us will go through this life, and at some point, God will say no to us, and we have to have a good theology of no. We have to understand what he is doing. At this point, God says no. Why doesn't he grant the request to Jesus? Doesn't he love Jesus? Of course he loves Jesus. He doesn't grant the request to Jesus because both Father and Son know that there is something bigger going on here. There is something far bigger. Yes, Jesus was going to have to go through the pain. Yes, he was going to have to go up onto that cross. He was going to have to suffer. He was going to have to die. But all that would be temporary. Within a couple of days, the whole thing would be over, especially compared to eternity. The whole thing would be over. But not only that, he knew that the outcome of his suffering was something that this world needed more than we could ever imagine. Right? God was doing something. We have to have a good theology of no. We have to be able to trust that even when our prayers, it seems so true, so pure, how could God not answer this? Why wouldn't he answer this one prayer? Jesus had to say, God, Father, not my will, right? But your will be done. Anne Graham Lotz says, if God can bring blessing from the broken body of Jesus and glory from something that's obscene as the cross, he can bring blessing from my problems and my pain and my unanswered prayer. So, when it is my turn, when it is your turn to drink the cup, we do it in faith. And even though the drink is bitter and it is painful, it doesn't mean that God doesn't love me, that he has abandoned me, that he doesn't favor me. It doesn't mean I've done something wrong. I haven't strung the right phrases together in prayer. It doesn't mean that I'm not righteous. It means simply that for some reason, in some God-ordained situation that I can't even imagine on this side of glory, it means that it is my turn to drink the cup. And it is an act of humility under the mighty hand of God, where we humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God to say, God, you are sovereign. I am not sovereign. I do not know. I cannot see all the things that you're doing. My eyes are not big enough to see everything that is happening on this planet. I trust you, because if Jesus went to the cross and he died in that way, and you brought something this good out of it, like my salvation, then God, I'm going to believe that even though I can't see it, you are going to bring something good out of this. God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. It sounds so trite, but it is so true that I could drink the cup and I could trust that he could redeem this too. Something that seems so unredeemable, something that seems so wrong. As you wait for justice, as you wait to hear from God, as you wait for healing, as you wait for God to respond to your prayers, can you just stop? Every once in a while, and even in your desire and the fact that you think something is so wrong with what's happening here, can you just stop and acknowledge the goodness of your Father? It's a bitter pill sometimes. It's a hard thing for us to do. We can't imagine how it could go this way and work out. But somehow, he does it all the time, somehow God can redeem even that, even what you're going through.